So my name's Monk Rowe, and I'm with the Fillius Jazz Archive, and we are in Boston at the City Winery, and I'm very pleased to have James Hunter here with me. So, how did you find America?
No, I'm not going to do that
No,
one.
we don't want to go there.
Well, you know, you mean this time or the first time?
Yeah, the first time.
First time, very large. Very large. There's a lot more. There's a lot more of it than I thought, and I didn't realise how much of it. If we're talking old geography here, I didn't realise how much of it was the South. I didn't realise it started so soon. You know.
Yeah.
Just under Washington. Yeah.
Correct. That's
Yeah,
about
it was-
midway.
And I thought it was the bottom quarter. It was about 3/4 of it, isn't it?
You find audiences here any different than in Great Britain?
Not markedly in terms of what do you call it? In terms of reaction, you know, we get the same reaction. You know, I'm not going to say whether it's good or bad, but it's
I
the
was going
same.
to say, you got to follow up on that.
People who like it a lot, you know, and it's the some of the places they can tend to be a bit more elderly, you know. It depends where you go. It depends on in the cities it tends to be a young a lot, and then the further out in the sticks you go, they tend to be a more elderly. You know, I'm talking about people my age.
I'm going to pose a very deep musical question to you.
Ah, great. Well, I'm unqualified for that one, but I'll have a stab.
Do you remember the first time you heard the groove?
Oh, the one I'm always using. Yeah, I mean, I'd always heard variations of it. I mean, the first kind of really popular one would have been "There Goes My Baby" by the Drifters, I suppose, and that's why it's because of that record that almost everything from 1959 onwards had a variation of that sort of beat, and some reason it fell out of favour by the mid-60s, you know, to be replaced by dunka dunka dunk, which is equally good, but somehow not as infectious, not always, you know.
Mm-hmm. And it's danceable too.
It is. I've always dug it, and it's sort of it mystified me how that kind of fell out of popular use, and I've overused it myself as a kind of compensatory thing. Yeah.
I was looking at the top pop songs in Great Britain.
Oh yes.
About the time you were 13 or 14.
Right, which would have been 1975, about them, yeah.
And it's a very mixed bag. You've just got some sort of very corny tunes on there.
Mm-hmm.
You've got the start of some heavier rock and roll. And can I ask you why you didn't go the sort of Led Zeppelin route?
I mean, much as I like that stuff and approve of it, those sort of guitar sounds, kind of like there's the level of distortion where it becomes a bit mushy for me, and I like it loses a bit of bite. So I like it just dirty enough so you can still hear what's going on. It's like having a curry that's too hot that you can't taste it. You know, so I do like a little definition with me filth, you know.
Yeah.
So which is why, you know, I kind of like that period where people were just starting to overdrive them a bit, you know.
I think I read that you know what those black flat things that go around at 78 RPM are.
Oh, is that what they are, where the thing jumps?
Yeah.
Yes, that's right.
You got turned on to music through 78?
Well,
right?
yeah, kind of initially. It gave me a taste for a sort of more vintage style, I suppose. For some reason, it gave it gave me a taste for stuff of a certain age. Of course, a lot of that stuff was only about, say, 12 years old at the time that I was listening to it. You know, and it seemed old enough to be another world, really. And it was when I was, we were living in this little caravan in Thorrington Cross, which is just outside Colchester, and it was quite remote, really. And there wasn't much entertainment on view. We had a bit of a housing situation, and no television, which was probably a plus. It'd be more of a plus these days, to be honest. Mm-hmm. But we on weekends, because of the limited amount of room in this caravan, there was a family of 4. We were living there, And at weekends we'd be allowed to drag out the fold my mum and dad's bed up into the wall and drag the record player out.
Were you a dancer? Did
Never.
you dance to that? Never danced to
No,
that
not
music?
until last New Year's Eve I became one, because my wife dragged me onto the dance floor when we went out New Year's Eve, and that's the first time I voluntarily did it. In fact, I think it was my idea. Yeah, for the first time.
Was
yeah.
it a slow one or a fast one?
Fast? It was a Gene Vincent tune. It
Okay.
was a more obscure one of his, you know, slightly soul-y sounding. It was. I wish I could remember what it was, but yeah, I just dragged her onto the floor, and all that time I've been a professional wallflower right up until then.
Okay.
Yeah.
When did the guitar come into your hands?
14 years old, 1976. My brother got fed up. He bought one the year before, and he got fed up of me messing his scratch plate up. You know, he's one of them people that cares what his guitar looks like. You know, he's a very good guitarist himself, and to sort of keep me off his guitar, he prevailed on his best pal to sell me his guitar, which was like basically almost just one step up from a cigar box with you know, a cheese cutter sort of strings on it.
Was it electric?
No, it was acoustic.
Acoustic guitar.
Yeah, give me £2 that cost me. I don't think it even had a brand name, you know. Yeah, it was.
When you first started learning chords,
Yeah.
I'm not sure how to put this, but did you know what they were?
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
I do. You mean the names of them?
Yes, the names of them. And
Yeah, Perry, my brother, taught
Okay.
me the one that really looks as if it's going to be difficult is an open G. And you see someone do it and you think, how do you distort your finger? That's really easy, but it looks difficult. So, but the ones that actually drove me to tears were the Barre Chords. But once I got hold of them, and as my wife will tell you, I cheat with the A-shaped Barre Chords. You're supposed to have these three fingers together, all putting on there, and then that bar across it. I can't do that, so I just use the little finger
nice.
and turn it into a sixth. And if I don't want it to be a sixth, I don't hit the I don't hit the thinnest string. You know, that's how I get round it.
It's funny you mentioned the six, because one of my favorite songs of yours, which we'll get to, has sixes all over it.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Oh, the chords, you mean?
Yeah.
A lot of them do, I think.
Yeah.
But all right, we'll get to that.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yes.
sure.
Musicians, in my experience and in my own experience, always are trying to get to the next level.
Right.
They're trying to make it.
Yeah.
And what level did you start at?
Well, below the poverty line. So you know. Yeah, I mean, it started as a struggle, and I think maybe every 10, it might be every 20 years, something happens that lifts the profile up and, you know, brings people in. You know, we have a sort of something that looks like a big break, you know, and it suddenly happens. So it happened when I first left, around the time I first left Colchester to go to London. We were basically a busking outfit, the band I had, and we used to busk on the corner of Camden Lock. And we got quite a following, and we actually got invited to do indoor gigs. And the sort of following from the street followed us indoors. And that was quite, we nearly got caught up in a bidding war, which both sides voluntarily lost, you know.
Me from a record company?
Yeah, two record companies fighting over us. I think the conversation might have gone, you have them, no, you have them, you know. That. But you know, that didn't really sort of end up happening. But we got on this TV program called The Tube on Channel 4, and there was a huge interest in us after that. The very next pub date we played was absolutely packed to the rafters, and that was one of those big steps up.
How many, you talk about we, how many were in we?
Oh, there was 4 of us at the
Okay.
time. I used to double on or alternate between harmonica and guitar. We had a female guitarist, her name was Dot, who was brilliant, and double bass and drums. So it was, people used to think we were a sort of rockabilly outfit, you know, yeah, but just because of the double bass, you know, and you know, I think a lot of people would have At that time in the 80s, they probably would have thought Charles Mingus was rockabilly, you know. They weren't used to seeing a double bass outside the context
Right.
of the Philharmonic Orchestra.
That's
you know.
right. But if you think about it, the early Elvis and all that stuff
It was all
over there.
influenced by
Yes.
blacks, R&B. Yeah,
Yeah.
totally.
Were you doing your own tunes at that early point?
A handful of them. I mean, we were like a covers band doing what we thought were obscure covers. You know, we were trying not to be complete copyists. We'd do the lesser well-known things that are standard. I can't remember what we would have done now. Actually, I think I did stuff I thought nobody had covered, like Further On Up the Road by Bobby Bland. I didn't realise that, you know, your Claptons and whatnot had already done it to death since then. Which I thought that was an indication I was a good judge of a song, because I mean, I found, you know, about long time ago, I sort of, there was a Ivory Joe Hunter tune called I Need You So, and I started doing that occasionally if we were busking, and I saw it on the arse end of a compilation of his stuff, thinking it was just some obscure, and I didn't realise it had become an R&B standard that every vocal group used to do it. I had no idea, so I thought, I'm not a bad judge there, am I?
Yeah. Did you feel compelled to try to recreate what you heard on these records as close as possible?
Less recreate than what do you call it? There is a word for it.
Just
Emulate.
Emulate.
Yeah, trying to get the same spirit of that. And I think you can stultify something by trying to absolutely replicate it. So I was trying to convey the same spirit. I always felt that, for the most part, with a few exceptions, that the white American and British acts who attempted that style of music used to lose the bit of the finesse, and they'd compensate by adding a bit more aggression. But the slinkiness of the, the sort of sinuous, balletic of grace of the way the black performers used to do it was lost on a lot of us Caucasians, you know. So I'd try and copy that element of it. I mean, sometimes people like Georgie Fame would get the groove, you know. They'd find the groove. I mean, and Duffy Power, he was another more obscure sort of British white soul singer, and he'd add his own little thing of strangeness to it. He used to transcend that thing of, you know, copyist. He'd add his own element to it. Yeah.
Were you compelled by or suggested to by producers like, James, if you just would do this, we could sign you, or you would?
No, I never had that carrot dangled in front of me. I was lucky. I don't know how resolute I would have been if I'd been faced by any sort of temptation or whatever. You know, there was maybe a couple of instances, but the promise wasn't, you know, wasn't sort of, maybe the carrot wasn't big enough for me to go for it, you know.
To get up to that next
Yeah,
level,
it didn't seem
it
like it was going to be an obvious next step. So, but I don't really remember being tempted, you know.
So you spent a lot of time playing pubs and the 10 to 2 type gigs, or was it longer than that?
Oh, sometimes it was that, and you know, there's a little bar we used to do in near Carnaby Street. It had a pretty grueling night shift, you know. It was not quite the same level as the Beatles would have been doing in Hamburg, but it was enough. But most of the pubs were kind of like regular hours, you know, from 9 until about, I don't know, doors would open at 9. It'd be everybody finished by midnight, you know. So that was fairly lenient.
Not too bad.
Yeah, nothing too grueling.
Yeah, I was wondering if you times in your life where you've worked like a day job and played at night too.
No, not since I left. Excuse me. When I worked on a railway before I left to come to London, I was a railway worker during the day, and at the weekends I'd sneak off to London and do the music, and left that. And it wasn't until nearly 15 years later, I think, about 15 years later, I started working when the gigs started to thin out, I started to do casual labour through an agency. And of course that was pretty good, because if a little tour came up, I could say I'm not available that week. So I kind of, apart from the fact that the agency would stitch you up at every opportunity, you know, you still had the freedom to pick and choose where you wanted to work.
I see.
Yeah.
So you got acknowledgement from Mojo magazine, UK's greatest soul singer.
Oh. Well, I don't know if it's true, but I don't mind people saying that.
Well, I'd like to say that by the power vested in me, I'm going to call you King of the Hooks.
King of, oh, great.
Because I just think, not just me, my whole family, we were turned on to music by our daughter, by the way.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, she's 36. She's 36.
Oh, right.
And she sent us, you've got to watch this guy. And I find your music to be immediately grabbing. And I wonder how that happened.
Well, I think I do sort of maybe unconsciously study how a pop song works, you know, because it's the stuff I'm doing is, you know, to all intents and purposes, soul and R&B is pop music, you know, altogether geared towards a particular market. You know, it's all meant to be commercial music. For people to engage with it, it does need to be quite conversational and flow, and have something identifiable in it. So yeah, I do that sort of consciously.
And you don't wait too long to get to the point.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I do like short records. I mean, it's people like Bob Dylan started doing really long ones because they used to have to keep it short so that the jukeboxes wouldn't that the arm wouldn't lift up too soon. You know, I think that's why they were all, you know, but up to the early 60s they were all 2.5 minutes. But Bob Dylan sort of pretty much broke that with like a Rolling Stone, simply because he had a lot to say that couldn't be contained in that limited amount of time. And it all went on from there, you know. Yeah. I think by the 80s, though, the only reason singles were in excess of 4 minutes long was because the bulk of the track was the fade out. You know, I think
that's
most
true.
of it's all fade out. The chorus just goes round and round, you know, and outstays its welcome. I think that's what happened a
and
lot.
the producers like really slow pulling that.
Yeah, I think people were starting to look in terms of sheer volume rather than, you know, what was actually being said.
So the James Hunter 6 has this, in my opinion, has this identifiable sound. And I think part of it is because you're still playing with a stand-up bass.
Yeah, I think probably. Because it has a certain warmth to it, you know, and it was a shame it disappeared entirely for a while in popular music. It's just got a...
Yeah. And it doesn't dominate the music like an electric bass can.
No, that's right. It's, you know, like basically a rhythm section in a record that appeals to me. It sort of just sits in the pocket and drives it along, and sometimes you're not that conscious of it being there. You just feel it. It's very much the case. A good example is somebody like Bill Doggett, whose contributions to his own records aren't always readily sort of apparent, but he's there driving it from underneath with the bass pedals, making it sort of throb along, and you know, you can't hear what he's doing, but you can feel it.
Exactly. You go to put that, you're saying, okay, what key's he in, and you're putting your ear closer to the speaker to pick out those bass notes.
Yeah, it's nice if you have to look for it, yeah.
Yes, it's nice if you have to look for it. I like that. I also wondered, how did you settle, or maybe it wasn't settling, but with two tenors, or the tenor and the baritone, rather than, if you had an alto and a trumpet, your band would sound a lot different.
It would be different. I mean, the thing is, the reason I initially went for that is because you could get the most range, or the most variety of sounds between the two. So I went for that initially because a lot of the New Orleans rhythm and blues stuff I was listening to, like Guitar Slim, Edgar Blanchard, was using this doubled up tenor and baritone playing octaves apart, so which give it a sort of fat spectrum of sound. But my idea was to not always just keep it to that, but to get as much variety as I could. And so a typical, arrangement of mine will have them maybe start doing an octave and then swoop in and meet each other and do a harmony and then come back out again. And so it was the idea of making very, very little sound like a lot. So so people aren't sure how much. Sometimes I'll throw, the guitar will join in and make a third part. Or I'll have them back up a vocal phrase. I'll have a 3-part harmony. They'll be covering a vocal phrase with a.
Oh, you got
so
one note in there that
harmony.
you're singing, and the saxes are...
That's right. They're harmonising with me, so it's like instrumental doo-wop, And I don't know how often that's been done, but it's I thought of doing that just to fill out the sound. Because I used to see a lot of soul R&B bands used to have an enormous horn section. You'd have everything, but they'll all be playing the same part. And I think it's easier to pick out when you've got a few. And I mean, I'd say I'd make better use of a lot of horns if I had them. But I always felt it's a waste of a horn section. You've got them all doing the same thing throughout. And say if there's a baritone, he's just parping and he's just there to blast the low notes.
Bow.
Yeah. The idea I got from the minimalist thing of getting a little bit to sound like a lot was a bass player we worked with years ago with an old incarnation of this band, Dave Laniardo. He lent me this album, and it was late 30s sort of Duke Ellington, small group stuff. And I was never into that big band gear really, but this was Duke Ellington with Rex Stewart and Johnny Hodges, was it on and they're doing and it's a small 3-horn section with just a basic rhythm section underneath, bass, drums, piano, and the amount of stuff they'd get up to with that. 2 of them would keep this little harmonised vamp going on, and one would be out front soloing, and then when he steps back in and they change it, another one steps out the solo, and they modify the thing to suit what the remaining 2 instruments are playing. And I thought that's a way. It sounds like a big wall of sound, but there's only three horns playing. And I think I nicked the idea from that.
That's great. You have to know what notes to pick, I think,
for
the horn players. And so, do your horn players make up those parts, or do you?
I do that, yeah. They contribute to it. They'll add suggestions, but for the most part, it's fairly easy for me because I couldn't just spin most of it out of my own head and just hum it to them and play it. I'm able to pick it out on the guitar what will harmonise. So if you play an instrument that you can hit more than one note simultaneously on, like a piano or a guitar, it's fairly easy to pick out harmonies. So I'd give. Generally, the tenor gets the melodic line that people remember, but the baritone player gets the thankless task of playing something really unmelodic to harmonise with it, so that they stick like a coat of paint. But with what I usually give to the baritone player, you couldn't whistle it to him. You couldn't say that and do that because you can't remember it. You just have to really pick it out, and and it goes with the top line. Yeah, so it's quite challenging.
Yeah, when you say that, because a lot of times in big band music, the lower parts, which sometimes were assigned to the less skillful players, were actually the harder parts.
They are, because you can't remember them. Yeah, you can't remember, they don't stick in your mind.
Melodic.
Yeah.
Sometimes the fingerings are weird because those are the notes that are needed and all that.
That's right. They don't suit that instrument or whatever. Yeah, and they're not comfortable in the key that horn is usually set to. Yeah. And I give them. I sometimes do. I've sometimes just arbitrarily written stuff in keys that aren't traditional guitar keys as well, either to make things easier for the horn players or to see if my voice sounds any different. So I've written one in A flat. I just did it for the sake of it, just so I could tell people I did one in A flat. That's purely that. Just showing off.
You get points for that.
I know, yeah. I know. One in B. B's not very common for guitarists, and you know.
And that puts the horns in. Well, the alto puts them in A flat anyway, or D flat.
Yeah, I mean they like that. They like your B flats and sort of
Yes,
thing. But
yes.
A flat, I think, was a good one for them. I can't remember. Well, I did once pick a key that was really uncomfortable for all of us. It might have been the A flat. I can't remember.
Well, you're obviously comfortable with that, but I wonder if early on, did you have this moment where you were playing horn parts on the guitar and you were telling the sax players, it's an A, and they're going, no, it's not.
Oh yeah, I knew it. They taught me that one straight on, and it's purely that their A is different from my A, just so that the writing will make sense. Somebody explained to me why, and I got it, but I understand why, but I can't explain it to anyone. I'm not. Yeah.
Are your charts written down?
Usually by the horn players, not me. I did try and teach myself to write music so I could just sketch it out and give it to them, but I got 2 bars in and gave up. But apparently I was reliably informed I had got it right, you know. But it was I just bought this rudimentary guide called "Learn Yourself Music Writing" or something like that, and I did manage to do 2 whole bars of this passage, you know. But
Yeah.
I might get my finger out and teach myself again, you know.
So when we watch the group tonight, will we see any music stands on the stage?
No, these blokes are incredible, sort of memorising stuff. I don't think I'll be capable of that level of discipline, but they you know. I've got a cheat sheet because I've written a new song that I haven't recorded yet, and I'll bung that down.
Okay.
And you know, and it takes me ages to memorise. I used to think I was a quick study, but I'm not really. And my songs are very verbose, you know, so it's a bit of a memorising job. But these guys have got, you know, they got everything down pat.
You've written so many tunes, I wonder if you have trouble remembering your own songs.
Only when somebody mentions it, because our drummer once said, you know what, you're the only singer I've worked with who never forgets his lyrics. And that night I forgot 2 of them.
Okay, I don't mean to jinx you.
It's if you're thinking about it, you forget. You know, it relies on letting you. This is a reason I'm usually quite careful to make. This sounds really big-headed, which I am, but I try and write a really coherent narrative structure in my songs, so that if I do forget what the next verse is going to be, I think about what I've just sung and thinking, well, if this was me talking, what would I say next? And usually that leads me to what the second verse was, you know. So it's a great help in memorising songs if you're not a quick study. Yeah.
Okay, name this James Hunter tune. It's a piano lick. Bum, 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 bum. Heads into the bridge of the song. It's one of my favorite moments. Do, 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 do.
Which one's that?
And it's got those 6 chords in it.
Oh, hell. You sang it very nicely, but I don't recognise it without the rest of the track.
That's right. It was I'll Walk Away.
Oh, right. What did we have on that? That was a piano player
Piano
doing
player.
it. Ah, yes, he
ding, ding,
threw that in. That
That's
wasn't my
nice lick.
contribution.
Yeah.
Yeah. I just went into a 7th, you know.
Yeah, okay.
And I said to him, do something around that.
Yeah.
That was a fella called, depending on which, I think it was a fella called Tom playing piano on that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, it's a song where you're talking about 6 chords.
And he took the secret with him when he left the studio.
I'm fascinated by, with that particular song, let's say, because you've got on a 6 chord and the bass is going boom, boom, boom. And just that,
Oh, that's right, yeah.
just that is a hook.
I guess it is. It's, you know, it's what you could call it a riff, couldn't you? And it sticks in people's minds. I did like 6 chords because they're, first, you know, they're also ambiguous. You can replace them with a minor, and you know, they're sort of interchangeable and they sound pretty.
Yeah, and you can sort of sing bluesy over them too. Choose which way to go.
You can. I mean, one tenor player we had I used to write a convoluted sort of chord sequence for him to solo over, and he'd he'd play in order to show. Sometimes he'd play in order to show he understood where the chords were going, and sometimes it was a bit unnecessary. And I said, no, just play blues over that bit. I said, the tune is in the chords. You just got to, you just got to flop over it and do it. It doesn't matter, but the tune's all in the chords. But I think he wanted to show me he was paying attention. But
That is true. Horn players like to. I know what you're doing here.
I'm like it myself. I like to show I know what's going on, whether I do or not.
Lyrically, where do your ideas come from?
Well, real life, either mine or other people's. There's or imagined conversations, what I would have said to somebody, under certain circumstances which haven't actually happened. So yeah, it's just or observations, some things like that. Anything that's of all my own half-baked opinions. Just set them to rhyme them up and set them to music.
Here's one I really like. If lying and cheating was any kind of crime, 100 years from now, you'd still be doing time.
Yeah, I was quite pleased with that one. Yeah, it's probably a variation on stuff that's been said before. My favourite rhyme is, and this is where we come in. Here comes the part where they start falling for one another. I know it by heart like deja something or other. That's like, it's hard to sing that one.
I believe I read that your stories are mostly fiction, but the names are true.
Well, that's right. They're real names and fictitious stories. Did I actually say that at one point? I might have.
Someone said that you said it.
I did say that. I've been quoted correctly there. Yeah, they're pretend stories, but the real names have been used to implicate the innocent.
Maybe it's my imagination, but your album, I think it was from '08, had more players on it. Had some strings.
Oh yeah,
had a vibes player.
That's right.
Yeah, and then
usually the vibes and percussion were done by the same person, so it was one person doing multiple roles. But we did get a string section in on that's the Hardway album for a couple of tracks. And People Gonna Talk, that too, both those albums. Right. But we did bring a string section in for one track on Minute by Minute as well for Let the Monkey Ride. Very minimal, but we sort of put that in.
Does some of that depend on your budget?
Yeah, it does, yeah. And sometimes something will fit. There have been times where we've just thrown something in, we could get it. We just did it because we could, not because we should. We can dress this one up and it will sound different from, what's going on. Which one should we put it on? It was a matter of that occasionally. But I think sometimes it's nice to dress a thing up just for the sake of it.
Yeah. And again, do you sort of suggesting to these players what to do?
Well, our tenor player at the time would write out the. I think he had a good grasp of what my sort of tastes were, and the strings was usually his contribution. He'd write that bit.
Yeah. You've got some licks that you like.
What one's that?
That was
That's the one that's in all of them.
You can't win.
Can't win. Yeah, we're going back here, aren't we? Yeah.
Yeah.
That was. That was just tacked on. That wasn't like a real integral. That was just to give the horn players something to do. We're all there. We might as well do something. That's why that one didn't really stick in my mind that much. What did was I wrote that song around about 2001, and then I wrote the third verse about several months later. I think by the next year, the one about holding the target still, and I sort of questioned myself: is that too silly to put in? Was that too comical? And I thought, no, keep it in. And I've done that several times since. I've got, is that line too funny? Is it against the grain of the song? And I think, well, anything that distinguishes it from, that marks you out as being different has got to be good. You know,
Definitely.
so,
Good
yeah.
turn of a phrase.
Yeah, there's.
Well, can I ask why that song isn't called I Can't Win?
Because you can't win that's a good question. It's a more recognisable phrase. People use it more often. You can't win, in the sense of one can't win. You know that.
But it's not in the song, right?
It's not in the song, right? It's so I will generally for a title I'll choose a more recognisable phrase over a little one. The more. Because the whole point is making use of a well-worn, familiar phrase. So you can't win is something you'll hear people more often, and they'll be referring to themselves anyway. So, yeah, that's why.
If you get a phrase like that in your head, that could be a song.
Yeah.
Do you get the guitar and just start?
Sometimes, yeah, I'll
bussing?
do that, and I'll try and find things to do with it. Prime example is "This is where we came in." It's a phrase that you don't hear these days because cinemas don't let people stay there for a second house, do they? They chuck everybody out and get everybody. In the old days, you'd walk in halfway through a film and you'd sit it through to the end and wait for the adverts to come round and then catch up until the moment and that's that phrase people used to use, and I always thought that phrase was crying out to have a song made of it, like an analogy for a relationship that's going tits up, the whole thing. You can see where this is going, So yeah, that's one I used, and yeah, usually it's that's the thing about pop music is sort of familiarity, making it. If you sometimes write something that you're surprised somebody hasn't written already, that's the kind of thing that somebody should have written by now. Why hasn't somebody written a song called that? And that's where I'm going. I think I'm starting from 1960 and sort of trying to point where, but for an accident of Providence, where popular music might have gone, But I'm developing it very slowly.
You've got a lot of ground to cover.
Yeah, really, yeah.
I suppose nowadays you could YouTube something and see if someone actually did write a song that you're thinking about a phrase, and you might find it.
I've done that. But minute by minute, I saw that on a
Doobie Brothers.
Minute by minute. I didn't know. Yeah, I found out afterwards. I saw it on a picture of a film poster for a film called Ring of Fire, with Dwayne Eddy doing the soundtrack and Frank Gorshin as the villain. It's about a cop taking a hostage through a burning forest, and the blurb on the thing says minute by minute something, and I thought that just stuck in my head, and I went, oh, I'm having that. That just sounded good, and I checked before I wrote it. I checked to see if anyone had written one called that, and Doobie Brothers had, and I thought, well, sod it, I'm doing it anyway. Because you can't copyright a phrase like that, I think a lot of my titles are fairly, most of them would have been used in one shape or another before, except things like "Let the Monkey Ride." That's nobody's, I don't think.
I Googled that phrase.
Yeah.
I said to myself, what does that mean?
Nobody's even said it, but
It all came back to you.
yeah.
That's all it was. So
That's
said,
right.
I have to read the lyrics and figure it out for myself.
Yeah, that's it, and it's really, as it was all used in, the context of the well-known phrase "having a monkey on your back," being, and I was going the opposite route of the Stones, Brown Sugar, they're writing about. You're supposed to think they're writing about a bird, a girlfriend, and they're actually writing about heroin. And I'm doing the opposite. I'm writing about
girl.
girl, but trying to make it sound like it's Persian rugs,
You're a backdoor man.
Yeah. That's an ambiguous phrase as well, isn't
indeed.
it?
When you write your set list for tonight, what goes into that?
Same stuff we've been doing the whole tour.
Okay.
Yeah, we've got it printed out.
Yeah, all right.
Yeah, I don't tailor it around, we sort of, we stick to one and just get used to the shape of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sometimes, well, I mean, we've got enough stuff, you know, but I don't move it around very often, you know, when I arrange it. I might change it for the next tour, but, you know, yeah.
And you're on Daptone now?
Yeah.
And you recorded, sometimes you record straight to 8-track.
Yeah.
What a unique idea.
Well, they always do that. Well, not really. It's been done to death in the old days, isn't it? It's just that very few people are doing it now, you know.
Yeah. When people tend to get as much, when they have all this gear they can use, you feel like you want to use it.
Yeah.
And
well, I mean, Gabe's case, Gabe Roth, he says you can do anything on, do anything on digital that you can do on analog. He just prefers the process. He just enjoys it more, the editing and everything.
Right.
Yeah. He says you can get all the effects and sounds with his whole thing is mic placement, you know, where you put the mic and what mic to use. That's how you get the sound. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. A British journalist I met reminded me of the phrase "across the pond."
Oh yeah.
Which we probably both
we're familiar with that.
Used to each other's countries.
Yeah.
And we take a certain amount of interest in things across the pond, like Brexit and so forth.
Yeah.
And I wonder if it's the same for you and your bandmates. Do they observe what's happening in the United States?
Totally, yeah. I mean, it's with the what's going on here now is, I mean, there's nobody who's not aware of it. You know, I mean, you know, American politics is usually at the forefront, and I suppose, you know, of the British news, you know, we're all very aware of that, and maybe to a lesser extent, America knows what's going on with Britain, but it's a sheer matter of scale, really, because there's a lot of America, so there's going to be a lot of people who aren't aware of the Brexit thing, and but very few people in England wouldn't be aware of, you know, the current incumbent. Blimey, how do I start to describe it? But yeah, yeah, everybody knows what's going on. Yeah.
Does it seem inexplicable?
Yeah, I suppose it's starting to become explicable. You know, it sounds fanciful, but you know, it's hard to believe he got voted in, isn't it?
Indeed.
Yeah, I mean, but you know, we've got our leader at home is this vacuous follower who basically will do anything to clutch onto power, including falling in with, you know, sort of extreme right-wing parties like the DUP. You know, that's how she got her false majority to stay in power after a hung parliament. Yeah, she. Yeah, I mean, she called a, what do you call it? She called a general election, you know, thinking she was going to get a huge mandate, and she made a cock of it, and yeah. Oh well, you know, I'm a Corbyn man, you know, I want him in because, you know, people say all the other stuff about him, and a lot of it's, I mean, we're dominated by a right-wing press at home. Most of it's owned by one Australian. And anyone who doesn't want the National Health Service to be sold off to various spivs is regarded as a hardline Marxist. You know, it's ridiculous. You know, the National Health Service was founded after the last war, and it was, you know, state-run healthcare for anybody, whether they can afford it or not.
I see.
And our government sees that as an asset to be demolished and sold off. They've always seen it like that. Ever since 1945, they've been trying to destroy it. You know,
well, some things are sort of the same across the pond.
Yeah.
Who are your musical heroes?
Well, when I was a teenager, it was, I think, Eddie Cochran and Gene Vincent I got into, threw them into Ray Charles, or that might have been simultaneous, and then I went more sort of underground and discovered the Five Royales, and that was. I remember when we worked with Alan Toussaint, he was quite what do you call it? Impressed that I'd even heard of them, because he said that back in the day it was only really ultra hip black people had heard of the Five Royales. They were a regional phenomenon. They weren't a worldwide. They weren't a nationwide success. They were a regional act, and you know, a bit of an underground secret, even in their prime. Yeah.
Were you a guy who went when you were young, went to the record stores and
browse through,
browse.
Look for the obscure stuff and that. I remember reading about Clyde McPhatter and deciding just on the description that he was my favourite singer. I'd never heard him, but the way this bloke described his voice, I thought, I've got to hear this. And this is like 1980, you know, you couldn't fight it, They weren't reissuing that sort of stuff then. And so I went to this little record shop in Southend-on-Sea in my lunch break, because that was Southend-on-Sea in Essex was within our jurisdiction as signal box maintenance men. So in my lunch break, I went off to this little place, and they had a box full of. They were reissued singles you couldn't find in most places. So I got to prove it to me. You know, I got first-hand proof of how good he was.
You know, the thing you mentioned, liner notes were great back
Yeah.
then.
You had something to read, didn't you?
Yeah, I said something to read, and as you said, it might catch your ear through reading it.
Absolutely, yeah.
What do you envision 5 years from now for yourself and your band?
No idea. I take it day by day. I've never had a 5-year plan. It's always I never give a satisfactory answer to that question, because I ain't got a clue. You know, what happens, happens. And I just try and, I think like you mentioned earlier, try and outdo myself each time, you know, try and make a better record. But I don't know how different it needs to be. My real ambition is to make the sort of record that I would rush out and buy if I heard it. That's purely it.
Yeah.
And get paid for it, you know. Make more money. That's about it, really.
Yeah. Have you toured the continent?
Yeah, quite a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Are you anxious to get home?
Yeah, I wouldn't mind, you know, but we haven't been out here that long. Yeah, wouldn't mind getting back. Yeah, we've got a lot of laundry to do, haven't we? Has it? Well, it's just flown by, isn't it?
Well, do you have to do anything to try to keep your voice healthy?
I drink loads of water. Apart from that, nothing, no. I used to warm up, but only when my voice was already suffering. It was like, it's like shutting a stable door after the horse has bolted, really. But Jessie got me to drink loads of water, which helped a lot. And she almost persuaded me to cut down smoking, which I'm down to 80 a day now.
Well, if I saw you in a year, you could say, I've quit 4 times already.
I tell you, I know exactly. I did tell her, it takes a lot of willpower to quit that many times.
Any questions I haven't asked you that you'd like to
No,
comment
I can't ask myself questions. No.
You have
How come there's no words on the dab tones?
I don't know. I think it's just not their policy. We used to. I actually fought it when we first did it. I said, they don't need that, because I always thought that the words aren't that important enough. And then when they insisted, my manager insisted on my early records, I went along with it and thought, no, I don't mind showing off the lyrics, you know. But
well, as Monk said, but at least you can understand the words.
yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
So
I thought that was my rationale for not including them, because they were fairly apparent, you know, they were, I think that a lot of records where they did that was because when the backing track would overpower the vocals anyway, so you needed
Stevie Winwood or
you needed subtitles, yeah. But I didn't initially think it was necessary. Now I sort of like it, but I think maybe it's because at Daptone the main thing is the the vinyl. Vinyl's the main product for them, and the CDs are a kind of incidental market for them. And you didn't tend to get lyric sheets in with the LPs, whereas you get a booklet with the you tend to get a booklet with a CD. So maybe that's why.
The cardboard ones are bad. Oh, the minute by minute one has.
That did, didn't
Yeah,
it? Yeah,
yeah.
right up until Hold On didn't have them. Yeah. So, did Minute by Minute have the lyrics in?
Yeah, it had a slide in.
Yeah, that's right. It did.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. I'll ask them. You know.
Yeah.
I won't fight tooth and nail because maybe people had more fun figuring them out. You know.
Right.
You know.
The old-fashioned way, you'd sit and write them down.
Yeah, that's right. And
Yeah.
go, you
Have
know,
you ever had another band cover your tunes?
lots of times. Yeah.
That's
yeah.
great.
Yeah, it's nice to hear. What's her name now? It's a nice lady who covered "Kick It Around," and Lisa Mills. She's American, but she does a lot of her work in England, and she covered "Kick It Around." She sang it very well, but I quoted her off because she left out these. I said, "You took out them two chords that distinguished it." It was in C something, and there was an A flat and an A and an A flat. I said, "What'd you leave that bit out for? That's the best bit." She took it very well.
Do you own your own publishing?
No, I don't. I think we've got in-house publishing with the record. You know.
Okay.
Somebody did try to persuade me to start a publishing company, and you know, I don't know if I could have made more loot with that or not. But maybe it's always worth looking into.
Okay, so I'll wrap up here. What makes one of your compositions, one of your tunes, not get on a record?
Oh, if it's a bit too generic. But if we're short of stuff, I'll put it in. If it sounds like anyone could have written it, if it really sounds, it hasn't got any distinctive touches or, you know, then I feel like, because sometimes I've deliberately tried, just for the sake of writing something, to write something generic like anyone would have written, like a standard pop song, and then you can't help but putting your own stamp on it by the third verse. I mean, I write to a formula. I tend to do this a bit like sitcom sort of comedy, two straight lines and a funny one, and I'll do that with verses. I'll do two straight verses, and then I'll throw a joke in the third one. You know, and it often happens with me, songs I'll do that.
You're the only guy I know who rhymed with cul-de-sac.
What song was that?
Whoa,
Oh yeah, cul-de-sac, Don't Come Back, wasn't it?
I finally made it back from that lonely cul-de-sac.
Oh no, that's One Way Love.
We love, yeah.
Yeah. Somebody must have done it, but
Well,
I'm the only person I know who did it.
well, we're looking forward to the gig tonight.
Well, thanks very much.
And I appreciate your time very much,
Pleasure.
and I hope that we
Thank you.
cross paths again in the future.
Certainly.
Okay.
I hope so too. Take care then.
Thanks a lot.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Pleasure.